Welcome back, everybody, to the Marketing Rules podcast. And it is my pleasure to welcome Ben Stocken. Ben, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on board. We've been trying to kind of organise this for a few weeks. I saw you kind of speak at an event a couple of months ago, and at that point, I was like, "Yep, let's get Ben onto the podcast because I think he's kind of going to really resonate with the audience." But if there's a few people in the audience who don't know about you and West Peak, it would be great if you can kind of give us a little bit about yourself, your background, and the business.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. First of all, lovely to be on the show. Really appreciate the invite, James. So West Peak, we are a learning and development consultancy. We operate sector agnostically, so we work both within the recruitment sector, but also across a number of other industries, and that's really purposeful. The purpose for that is that we get to periscope in and out of industries, and we get to take the best bits from like SaaS or insurance or elite sport, bring that into recruitment and vice versa. So we're trying to enrich the learning experience and the skills of everyone we work with. Another bit that makes us a little bit unique is we're a team of leadership, like contemporary leadership experts. So I've set about creating a learning and development consultancy that has people who have actually led people recently. They're really good in specific areas, and they all work for West Peak, which means that when we work with a business, we wrap around them and we can deploy the best person at negotiation training rather than me doing it. I'm not going to be the best person.
That sounds amazing. It sounds like a kind of a great setup you got there. And I know, as I said, I know a little bit about the business, and as we go through the episode, we'll kind of learn a bit more and kind of get a bit of a deeper dive into the kind of things that you guys do. But generally, what we're going to talk around today is kind of learning development and why people should invest in L&D. I'm sure you've got all kinds of reasons why people should invest in learning development. But I tell you what, let's tackle it from another kind of angle first. Is what are the reasons why people don't invest in it in the first place? What are the kind of things that the barriers that you see why people kind of don't go kind of put enough money into developing themselves and their staff?
It's a great question, and it's one that we come up against kind of day in, day out. But some of the reasons why people don't invest in learning and development, I would say, are they think they're too small. So they might think that they're too early stage as an organization to think about upskilling their people or upskilling their leaders in particular. Another reason, I think historically, it's been quite hard to measure the return on investment or what they're going to get for that investment, because it is a significant investment, investing in learning and development. And there's other things that, unless they are having a really open conversation with a consultancy about or with their internal L&D team about, it's easier to say, do you know what, we'll invest in this piece of tech, or we'll add another head, rather than invest that budget in upskilling our people. So I think there's a disconnect previously and historically. There's been a disconnect in how does what we do in terms of teaching, developing, enabling the performance of our people, how does that then kind of equal return on investment, such as profitability, engagement, retention. So either too small or find it a bit murky to try and find where the ROI is.
What about, and I don't take this the wrong way, what about cost?
What about cost?
What about
cost?
Well, no, not necessarily your cost, but my feeling is that I think a lot of businesses sometimes see it as it can be a kind of a costly thing as well, because there's a certain amount. Obviously, there's an outlay you have to do when it comes to kind of learning development, whether it's using a business like yours or whether it's sending people on courses or if it's online, whatever it is, there is a cost. And do you ever get that as a kind of a barrier, that sometimes people see it as maybe just too expensive, and that you've already kind of touched on it, that it's probably in their head, it's like, well, we just add another member of staff as opposed to kind of going down that road, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I'm going to maybe do the wrong thing by mentioning another cost, and that is there's a cost of taking people away from what they're doing day to day, whether it's sales enablement, sales enablement training, or whether we're working with first time leaders or exec leaders. There is a cost in terms of their time away from doing their day to day. So that's a cost that we need to factor in as well, and it's something we factor into how we curate and create our learning experiences and the embedding of that to make sure we minimize that time away, but also making it meaningful. Otherwise, you just see people on their phones, checking their Outlook or whatever's going on. But there is the first part of your question, which is it's an investment. Like with anything in your business, it is an important investment, and that decision needs to be made kind of with eyes open in terms of, okay, if I'm going to invest, X thousands of pounds, because that's what we're talking here, in developing the most important kind of cogs, contributing profit centers in my business, which are generally the talent you've hired in. How am I going to be able to know whether I'm 2 timing that, 5 timing that investment, and over what time period? And so I think, like, you're right, there is a price. There's definitely a price, and our role is to be able to have a consultative conversation and say, actually, this is going to be what it's going to cost in terms of price point, the investment. This is how we can help you measure it. And then it's like, are you up for partnering with us over a decent period of time for you to be able to see that? And there's no there's no magic wand. I wish I had some magic sprinkles. I could, walk into a business and go, there you go. Okay, tomorrow you will never lose another person, or tomorrow all of that new cohort of salespeople, they're gonna smash this quarter. It's an incremental process that really has to be seen as it can be a short term. There's low hanging fruit results for sure, but really it's a medium term to long term investment in the health and growth of your business.
Yeah, I guess it's one of those things where, if you see a 5% increase month on month, that kind of over a year is actually an incredibly significant kind of increase to your kind of bottom line. And it sounds very much like how we kind of sell marketing, in all honesty, is that you're not going to see results immediately, but over time there is a kind of there's marginal gains, if we're going to use sporting analogies, right? That can be kind of like tagged on, and over time those all add up basically to give you that advantage. And I guess that's exactly the same when you're kind of training up your kind of staff and your leadership teams and your whoever else you're going to be training. That there's going to be tiny little incremental steps, but in the long term, that's 30-40% you're going to kind of see.
Yeah, completely agree. And one of the things our sales process for us is we do a diagnosis call, an initial diagnosis call with a company, and that's really a really transparent conversation, which is around, are you ready to partner with us? Because saying, do you know what? Like we've just done an engagement survey and it hasn't come out great. Let's do some training. That there's potentially some underlying reasons why that might be, which you can fix internally in your business before you then invest in learning and development. That is going to yield some short-term results. If it's about processes or making sure that things are communicated clearly, we can give that advice without it costing you anything. And then it's about, right, if we're then going to do some learning and development work with you, that will land better because you've put the right groundwork in. So, as you said, we're probably talking to businesses using similar approaches in terms of, you're going to have to put the foundations in. I can give you some advice on what the foundations should look like or could look like for you. And then let's have a conversation when that's in place, so that I can put my hand on my heart and say, at the end of 12 months, we're going to, potentially walk away and you're going to be in a much better position because you're set up, there's embedded learning. We've maybe done a train the trainer with either some of your senior members, or you've hired an L&D person. And we can walk away and say, do you know what? We've left that business in a much better position than when we found it. Otherwise, we could probably get banded in with we'll do a couple of workshops crowd, charge you X amount, and then move on to the next, which really isn't what I founded the business on.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. Let's kind of come back to something you kind of mentioned earlier, which is around small businesses, because a lot of people who listen to the podcast are kind of small to medium size business owners, whether they're in the recruitment space, whether they are talent acquisition, whether they're kind of HR tech, rec tech, those kinds of businesses. You said that some businesses don't invest in L&D because they think they're too small. So let's take that as an example then. What would, if we've got a smaller kind of business, maybe I don't know, 10 people within the business, what's the reason for them to be investing in kind of learning and development?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and my answer is probably I can elaborate through a couple of clients we work with. So
Yeah.
when I founded the business 2.5 years ago. It was just me, and now there's seven of us. When it was just me, actually, some of the businesses that I worked with to start with, one was a recruitment business. They were two people, so a founder and their first hire, and then another one was I think it was five people, so two co-founders, and then they've got three people in the team. Um, the reason they wanted to work with us was an existing relationship. So actually, I knew of them. I was introduced to them through some previous work I've done in house. So them reaching out was actually, Ben's no longer working in house. I wonder what knowledge we can absorb and suck in to our businesses from him. That was clearly their reason for talking to me.
Hmm.
But actually, what becomes really, really apparent is that it is never too early to learn to lead well. If you have one person in your business and that's you, actually self-leadership is probably one of the go-to skill sets before you ever think about hiring your first 360 consultant or first 180 consultant, whatever that might be. So the self-leadership bit, actually, if you're setting up a recruitment business or a rec tech business, or even a marketing business, is think about investing in yourself. How are you going to be the most optimal version of yourself from a self-leadership perspective? And then the other two ships, which you'll know about, James, the other two ships that I talk about an awful lot is teamship and then followership. And whether you are a 3,000 person business or whether you're a 3-person business, we all have to role model for the rest of our team. We all have to have good teamship. We have to collaborate really, really well. And that's with your clients and candidates as well. So if you can upskill that, you're going to make more revenue. I see that all the time in the smaller businesses we support. And the last ship is about followership. So 3 ships: self-leadership, teamship, and followership. And that followership piece is actually, learning to delegate tasks really well as a small micro recruitment business. If you have aspirations of growing, you need to get really good at delegating and not kind of dipping in and micromanaging. But also, if you want to stay small and you want your business to be a really profitable lifestyle business, then you need a really good delegation skill set so you can go on holiday and you can know you have created team members in your team that are autonomous and can make good decisions.
Yeah, as I said, as you mentioned, Ben, I have kind of I've been at one of your presentations, so I know about the three ships. And that leads me on to the next question around kind of your learning methodology, right? I've done kind of, and I know a few kind of learning development businesses, and we've worked with a few of them, and everyone seems to have a little bit of kind of their own take. This is true. This is usually sold as their USP. Now, I don't believe that that's your USP, but I know you have some kind of unique kind of learning methods and kind of where that is kind of taken from. I mean, you've kind of got kind of I don't remember the name of the person. There's someone who kind of influences the kind of learning methodology of the business. So maybe you can talk us a bit around that as well.
Yeah, sure. So the learning methodology comes from like my 22 years experience within learning and developing individuals. So that the first part of my career was 5.5 years with England Rugby as a performance and development coach. Now that had a big foundational impact on me understanding A, how to transfer knowledge, B, how to do it very effectively when you've got a player's attention for a split second, and then C, it's about how do you make sure that is engaging and memorable so that it's retained and means something to the individual. So our philosophy really and our approach on how we deliver and facilitate learning, of course we're working virtual, hybrid, face to face. I think the majority of our delivery has moved back to face to face. People are really looking, even completely virtual organizations, they are really embracing using learning experiences, and I'll talk more about experiences in a second, but using learning experiences as a great tool to bring people together. So they might bring people together, on a quarterly basis, whatever. Yes, of course, they'll have the company drinks and go for dinner, but also use that as a moment to upskill their teams and do it in a really meaningful way. Now, one of the how we deliver is we've actually started delivering a lot through immersive games and learning experiences. So one of the ways we do that, we can do that kind of outdoors. So we take people out into like the sunny Brecon Beacons, or Snowdonia, and we'll take them out for 24 hours. They'll have a really immersive experience, do something challenging together, which can be suitable for a number of different ability levels. So that's one kind of offsite bit, which we find is really powerful to kickstart a learning engagement. And then when it comes to, inside, so classroom, in a room, kind of, workshops, ours are probably a bit unusual when people walk into a session with us for the first time, because they're more than likely going to play an immersive game that's going to initiate an experience, which we kind of use as a training needs analysis tool to benchmark where they are. And then we can then land the lessons from that game in reality. So we're very facilitative. We want to create experiences that are memorable. And then what we do is we then use embedding tools for the remainder of a 12-month engagement that we typically work with clients, that allows us to minimize the forgetting curve, which everyone has, but also helps us to really instill the lessons of what it means to use this tool, this theory, whatever, in a practical environment where the rubber hits the road.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned that kind of that piece around forgetting kind of the learning, right? Because that's always a bit that I've always seen a lot of businesses completely get wrong, right? That they don't kind of have the follow up, and they don't have the kind of continued contact, and they tend to and the client then, it's great while you're in the classroom, but then very quickly you kind of revert to type when you're back in the office. So what are the kind of things you do to just kind of to get people to kind of stay on target, to use a Star Wars metaphor?
Yeah, so there's a couple of like tried and tested ways that you can do that. It's got to start with the initial buy-in at the beginning of whatever learning intervention you're going to have. So people have to understand why they're in that room or that virtual call, why them learning this and retaining it and applying it is going to be valuable to them. So we're all super selfish. We all want to cut corners and cheat, don't we? So if that why is really anchored, and you can sell that and they can buy into that, then actually the learning transfer is easier. So people kind of, their skill goes up to a greater level than it would if they're just sat there going like, oh, this is kind of something I have to be in. And then it's about the regularity and the type of embedding kind of intervention we have. So we don't use any e-learning platforms. I actually think that e-learning and learning management systems are probably about to have their day with AI interfaces, etc. You're able to extract all the knowledge you want just by typing in a prompt, rather than having to go for a catalog of learning materials. But we use support and challenge groups quite a lot. So we will facilitate, maybe bi-monthly support and challenge Teams calls or Zooms calls, which are agenda driven, where people can come onto those calls and they can share what they've applied, what's working, what isn't working. Now that allows us to then anchor back to something we might have taught and facilitated, but also allows them to share their real world application of it and actually how that's working out for them. So we find that works really well. And then we've also used with clients a number of like 360 feedback profiling, and get feedback on their performance from other people, because that peer-to-peer kind of objective feedback is way better than me, checking in with you in 6 months, James, and going, oh, good, yeah, you still know how that works. Good, okay, tick, we can go again. So for me, it's always got to be like, how can we make sure that we're giving our clients a bit of an unfair competitive advantage by making sure that their people retain and apply as much knowledge as they can to improve their performance.
And last question before I let you go, Ben, and this is picking up against something you mentioned earlier, is measuring results, right? It kind of sometimes feel that with learning and development, it is a little kind of finger in the air. It's a little kind of ethereal, whether it's any making any impact on a business. So you must have some kind of tried and tested kind of methods and things you put in place to say, yeah, there is a correlation between what's happened here over time that has now kind of affected X.
Yeah. we just do feedback sheets at the end. If we get loads of smiley faces, we're happy. No, we don't. Actually, do you know what? We don't do that anymore. So we seek feedback at the end of every learning moment, learning experience, but that feedback is to be really specific in terms of what we can do to improve the way we've delivered that or the content. We don't actually ask for, out of 5, how enjoyable was your session? What we do is we look at it in a different way, and we sit down with the stakeholders for whatever program we're running at the beginning, and we say, right, what does success look like for you? If we're going to embark upon doing this together, what does the end point look like for you? And then we reverse engineer everything we create is bespoke for each business. And people have said to me, oh, Ben, we can't afford something bespoke. We just need something off the shelf. And my answer to that is actually, that's crap. Like, you can afford something bespoke. It's just how bespoke. Because everything should be delivered in your business language, trying to achieve your objectives. So we'll reverse engineer so that we know exactly where we're going. And then we will, with the partners, we will measure at agreed intervals those either controlled inputs that people might be doing day to day, but also the outcomes that they want. Now, we can do that in a number of different ways. I mentioned 360 reviews. We use part qualitative, part quantitative 360 reviews on leadership programs. And we've seen really meaningful adherence to learning because people know they're kind of being measured that way. But also we've seen like significant results in terms of one client saw a 94% increase in sales off the back of some work we did with 200 of their sales team last year. And we've just had another business we worked with who had a 60% attrition rate when we started working with them, which was huge. And they've got that down to 35. So still not great, but we've been able to measure in that sort of way.
Those sound like a kind of a pretty impressive figures, Ben, and I'm sure any business would be kind of scrabbling now to get your details. Which brings me to the end of the podcast. As always, we will include all of your details in the show notes. So if anybody wants to reach out and know a bit more about you and the business and get in contact, they can through the show notes. But Ben, for now, thank you very much.
Thanks, James. It's been a pleasure.